Welcome to Off Hours, a conversation between John Edwards and Chris Manning.
So, John, one of the things we've mentioned in the past is our love of documentaries, particularly design-oriented documentaries. And we've mentioned things like Objectified and Helvetica. And recently you had the opportunity as one of the Kickstarter backers of Design Canada to see an early showing of it here in Ottawa. What did you have to say about that, and what did you feel about that documentary when you finished watching it?
Yeah, this was actually a documentary we alluded to back in episode 12 when we talked a bit about Objectified and Helvetica by Gary Hustwit. And this is actually another film that Gary Hustwit has worked on. So he was the executive producer on Design Canada. And I was fortunate, alongside your wife of all people, I was surprised to see her there, to be among the first 1,000 or so people to actually catch a screening of this documentary. And I would highly recommend it to anyone to go and check out once you have an opportunity, either to see an actual screening live or once it hits video distribution format of your choice. It was a very inspiring and galvanizing film.
In Design Canada, presumably it was around Canadian design, but what was the focus of this film?
So the progenitor of the film, Greg Jarrell, he sort of alludes to this period in the 1960s and 1970s as the golden age of Canadian design. And in a lot of ways, I think he's correct in saying that. Mind you, some of the designers who were in the audience might contest that a little bit, or may have taken a bit of offense to that. But it really is just this age and period in Canada's history where Canada came into its own and found its identity and sort of stepped out from under the legacy that it had as a colony of Great Britain. And actually, up until the 1960s, our flag was not really much of a flag at all. It was very heavily influenced by the colonial era and actually featured the Union Jack on it. That was very striking to me as well. And I would just say it almost brought a tear to my eye, the flag portion of the film.
Yeah, that's something a lot of people don't necessarily realize, is that the Canadian flag, and in fact our national anthem as well, they're not particularly old. Most nations, we're 150 years old last year, and most nations this age have had their own flags and anthems for considerably longer than we have, but we're still in sort of the 50, 60 year range for both of those. So there are people alive who do remember the debates about whether we should change the flag and what we should do with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm certainly glad that they did change the flag, and I'm very glad that they landed on the particular design that they did. So it was Lester B. Pearson. He put forth a bill back on June the 15th, 1964, that the flag bill was put into motion. And he was leaning towards a triple maple leaf, quite ornate look to it. And he got some lashback for that. Fortunately, by some miracle, a committee was put together, and just a few months later, in early 1965, the Canadian flag was born in its much simpler, much purer, very well-designed flag. As you basically distilled the maple leaf down as simple as you can, while still remaining much of its essence and its charm. I mean, there's certainly been designers since then who've simplified the maple leaf even more and made it even more stylized, but you lose a little bit of its essence. And I think that the team here did an admirable job of coming up with a flag that was representative of Canada. And actually, the way that they came to settle on the maple leaf was very interesting as well. They went through it and touched on it a little bit in the documentary, and I wasn't as familiar with it, but it was sort of a grassroots thing in that European settlers had sort of identified with this maple leaf, or identified the country with the maple leaf and the maple tree, and early settlers depended on maple syrup and all that, and this just came to be something that represented Canada in both world wars. People would sew patches on their uniforms, or spray paint it on a plane or a tank and things like that to represent Canada and have that solidarity.
Yeah, it's certainly an easily recognizable symbol, and it's something that we still use, obviously, when we travel. I know I usually have a maple leaf of some kind on my bag or whatever, just to make it easy for people to recognize that I'm Canadian. So it's certainly something that's well recognized, and it's very, very easy to pick out, even if it's small.
And of course, the film pointed out the old trope that many Americans will slap on a Canadian flag when they're traveling abroad because they find they get treated better.
Yeah, they do.
I was really, really heartened and inspired, and then was proud of my country, seeing the way that the flag came together. A lot of the aspects of the film, I think, did a very good job of capturing Canada and what it is to be Canadian. They did an excellent job of making sure there was a diversity in the footage and the faces that appeared on screen, while also not shying away from some of the ways where we could have been better in the past in our dealings with people who originally lived here in this country, and then sort of the native affairs, as well as addressing periods in our history where white immigrants were favored, and periods where women weren't treated as well as they ought to have been, which is it's actually just intrinsic in the era that the film looks at itself. It was primarily white males who were running the design scene at the time, but they did a good job of bringing women in as well, and particularly some more modern female designers of different ethnicities to be able to speak to that era and where things stand now, and sort of their sense of the design scene growing up. And all in all, I'd say it's a very, very nostalgic film for me to watch because it imbued all these symbols I had grown up with a deeper sense of meaning and purposefulness. And there's a lot of things that I may have just taken for granted.
Yeah.
Growing up or walking around in my day-to-day life suddenly are infused with more meaning and deeper purpose, and you can understand what the thoughts that went into them.
Right. Yeah, we were. I mean, I'm a little bit older than you, but I'm still not old enough to have been alive during Expo 67 in Montreal, which was one of the big catalysts for a lot of this design. However, the ripple effects of that era, the late 60s design, definitely echoed through the 70s when I was growing up. And it was everywhere, everything from the way that the government of Canada was branded to a lot of corporations, the Olympics, in the 80s when we had the Calgary Olympics, a lot of sort of that design language of Canada definitely carried on through those decades. So it's definitely my childhood, and just the little bits and pieces of the video that I've seen. Sort of some of the promo stuff. I'm looking forward to seeing it because it definitely is very nostalgic of my childhood and growing up in Canada. And I don't think it's something that a lot of people outside of Canada will necessarily realize until they go back and see this stuff. Like, I don't think they'll realize just how iconically Canadian some of this stuff is.
That's another thing I should mention as well, that I really appreciate what Greg Jarrell did in putting this film together and bringing design documentary titan like Gary Hustwit on board. He was actually able to film some footage with Massimo Vignelli commenting on some of the logos that were designed here in Canada. And unfortunately, Massimo has passed away just a few years ago, but he's a very big name in the world of design and iconography, and he has quite a slew of iconic American brands that he created their identity for. And just seeing him in his commentary on things like the CN logo for the Canadian National Railway, and then the logo for the province that I grew up in, and his commentary on the fact that it got ruined by the Liberals rebranding in the early 2000s there. And I agree with him 100% on that. I'm all aboard the previous logo for Ontario. And in fact, you can still see that logo on all sorts of
Sure.
buildings and signs and things. I noticed actually just last night driving along the highway, there's a big building here in the capital that still has the old Ontario logo. It's a trillium that is still glowing in bright white on the side of it. But the new one just doesn't hold a candle to the old one.
Yeah, you're not a fan of the modern version.
You mentioned the logo for the Olympics there. One of the interesting things that I learned about that from this documentary too is just that it represented the Olympics, of course, and having the Olympic rings there, and then there's the podium coming up out of those, and then a race track as well. All that sort of integrated in one single piece of identity as a logo mark. And on the word mark side of things, the Canada word mark that was designed by Jim Donahue, and anywhere you see Canada written in any sort of official capacity, from paperwork that's floating around in government halls here in the capital to the sides of ships that are patrolling our shores.
Yeah, and it's funny how many people think that like modern designers, when you start talking to people who deal with graphic design in the government here in Canada, and it's funny how many designers think that that's something that they can change, but that word mark that's off limits. You can't change that at all, and that hasn't changed since it was created. But it's funny how many designers try and make changes to that to modernize it a little bit, and it's like, no, that's you are not allowed modifying that in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, and it's instantly recognizable wherever you see it. It's again one of those things you just sort of grow up with. As Roman Mars might put it, it's 99% invisible. It's stuff you don't even think about. But something about that particular word mark that I was surprised to learn was that it was based on the typeface Baskerville. He just took that typeface, set it slightly heavier, and then another little surprise in there, which I had never caught on to, but it's absolutely obvious now looking at it, is that he used the stick on the D as a flagpole upon which to fly the Canada flag. So the Canada word mark is essentially the word Canada in a typeface that's similar to Baskerville, which is a serif typeface. And then over the A at the end of Canada is the Canadian flag. And it's, iconic. And then as well, there's all the government signage all across the country. It also has a design language behind it that was very intentional. Something that warmed my heart and made me proud about that too is that came about at a period in time where there were some rifts in the country. I mean, there still are to some extent between Quebec and the other provinces, and they were very intentional about putting the French language front and center and giving it the exact same amount of space and presence as English on pretty much everything that they were putting out. So all the government signage, it's all built on this nice grid system, and there's always English and the French side by side, not one above the other. That was a very unifying gesture that was put forward by the government at the time. And then another thing I learned that wasn't actually in the film, but in the Q&A session afterwards that came up, is that the name of the film, Design Canada, is actually, it harkens back to an actual department in the government that was Design Canada. That was a government body that's also a contributing factor to this sort of golden age of Canadian design, is that the government prioritized it as a part of sort of coming into our own and finding our identity as a country. There was a quote that stuck out to me, which was to say the most with the least, and I found that really resonated with me.
Yeah, certainly one of the key elements of a lot of that is just its minimalism. A lot of that design from the time.
And counter to that minimalism was, I think, a very good balance in the film was Heather Cooper, who's one of the few female designers who was in the film and actually played quite a big role in the documentary. And she was responsible for designing the Roots logo, which is an iconic bit of Canadian branding as well. And they've certainly benefited as a brand from being front and center at the Olympics year after year as an official sponsor and official outfitter of Canada's Olympic team. And another neat piece from the film on the Olympic front was the design of the 1972 Team Canada hockey jersey, which was designed not by a Canadian, but an Englishman who'd come to live in Canada, John Lloyd, who actually really didn't know much about hockey at all, but he designed this iconic jersey that showed the Canadian maple leaf from the flag, which was quite young at the time, still only 6-7 years old at that point in time, and just very prominent on the front of the jersey. And one of the conditions from the Olympics for all the jerseys from all the countries that the country's name had to be very prominent as well. And this kind of flew in the face of the particular design that he had come up with. So rather than having the athletes' names on the back of the jersey, every single member of the men's hockey team that year had Canada written where their last name would normally be on their jersey.
Interesting.
Which is very, very unifying as well.
Yeah.
All in all, it was a great film. I'd highly recommend checking it out if you have the chance. And, maybe it's just the nostalgia in me, but I would say I actually enjoyed watching it more than I did Objectified.
Interesting. I'm curious to see that, and I didn't get a chance to go out to it. I know Tamara and her friend Sue went out to see it at the same showing that you were at. I unfortunately wasn't able to make it to it, but I'm certainly looking forward to when it gets released digitally, which I expect is probably going to be a little ways down the road at this point, just because they'll probably try showing this at film festivals and whatnot over the next year or so. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a little while before we see this as a digital download somewhere or on Netflix or something like that.
Well, you were a backer of the new Rams film that's coming out, and
Yes.
I missed out on that one. So we'll have to have a screening of that one at some point.
Yeah, unfortunately, I won't be anywhere that the Rams film is going to be showing. I don't think any of the early showings of it, which is too bad because I certainly am looking forward to that one. I'm a huge Dieter Rams fan. Maybe we'll sit down and watch Design Canada and Rams, and we'll do a double header or something because I think Rams is due for release later this year. So hopefully we'll get a digital download of both of them somewhere around the end of the year.
Well, I'm all in on that. Interestingly, I don't know why it jumped out at me, but in the closing credits of the film, there's a children's book illustrator and author named John Klassen from Winnipeg, and he wrote some fairly popular children's books that are called "This Is Not My Hat" and "I Want My Hat Back," and my kids in particular have really enjoyed them. But it was neat to see that he was one of the big backers or bigger backers behind the film, and just spotted his name there in the credits. And another Canadian children's book author and illustrator that has crossed my radar recently is Julie Kraulis, who I believe authored and illustrated Armadillo in Paris and Armadillo in York, among some other books. But the reason she popped onto my radar was because of some watches that she has drawn. And what did you think of these when you saw them?
Yeah, I had no idea about Julie's work, and it's funny. I've seen some of her work without knowing that this is that she was the one who created this. But she's doing these fabulous drawings of watches and incredibly lifelike drawings of watches at a large scale with pencil, and her work is just absolutely incredible. I'm hugely impressed with this, and as with so many of these kinds of things, I had no idea that she was working out of Canada and that working out of Toronto, in fact, that we had somebody doing this kind of thing. But this drawing that she did of the A. Langenson datograph is something that I've definitely seen before and is absolutely fabulous. The detail that she's putting into these is just incredible. But I've definitely started following her on Instagram now, and I'm going to keep an eye on her because this is amazing stuff.
Yes, absolutely. And actually, she has recently posted some prints of the Paul Newman Daytona and an Omega Seamaster for sale on her website. So if you'd like to have the rare chance to hang one of these pieces on your wall. She has made it possible to do that. Now, they aren't inexpensive, but considering the work involved, on the order of 200 to 300 hours of work for each piece, the detail in them is just astounding. Did you end up cutting into that case band at all yet?
No, I haven't. I haven't cut into it yet. I need to do a couple of other things because I need to make a mandrel to hold it on the pencil chuck. So I'm and I haven't decided yet how I'm going to do it. I think what I'm going to do is have a sleeve that goes through the inside of it, and then sort of it'll be threaded on either end so that I can screw it down, and I'll probably set it up so that I can put a bunch of them together and sort of cut them all simultaneously. I think that'll probably be the best way of doing it. So
Right.
I need to turn a few more of those bands so that I can sort of stack a couple of them up together and cut them all at once. Because I find that trying to cut just a single narrow piece like that is really tough because the lead in and the lead out end up having problems. So you either have to sort of turn it oversized so that it's longer than it needs to be, or you need to put something on either end to sort of support it. I guess it's a bit like when you're cutting teeth on a gear, right? If you're cutting these tiny little gears, you can't just put a single gear onto your lathe or whatever and start cutting those really fine teeth. You need something supporting it on either side, or else you're going to have problems. So it's the same kind of situation.
All right, so I look forward to seeing when the first ones start turning out.
Yeah, that's high on my priority list, and I'm also waiting because I'm upgrading my tag mill with ball screws, but I'm waiting for them to arrive. I was hoping they were going to arrive last week, but they didn't. So maybe they'll come this week, and I'll be able to work on upgrading my tag, because then I can machine the wax for the lugs, because that'll be the next thing on the list, is getting those lug cast so that I can then cut the channels in the center band to be able to support them, or where they're going to end up going. So yeah, a bunch of stuff like that. There's sort of a whole pile of things that are all sort of happening at once, and some of them rely on others before it makes sense to keep working on them.
Was that tag as in TAIG?
Yeah, TAIG, the tag mill.
So one of their mini mills?
Yeah, I've had both their lathes and their mills. In fact, their lathe is what I first started turning pens on. I had little tag lathes that you could get through Lee Valley, and in fact, that was my first CNC lathe as well. I converted it to a CNC lathe.
Interesting.
Yeah, it wasn't particularly effective because I didn't understand anything about screws and efficiency and backlash and anything like that when it came to CNC equipment. So that was definitely an eye-opening experience. But yeah, I've also I ended up buying their mill, their little desktop mill, because at the time it was really them and Sherline when it came to mills. And the tag mill is definitely more robust and better built than the Sherline one is. That tag CNC mill, I have put that thing through hell. I have put thousands, probably tens of thousands of hours on those lead screws, going back and forth and cutting the cutting barrels and stuff like that out of wax. The way that I cut them, I'm able to average out the backlash problems in the screws, because it's just a simple V-thread lead screw that's in there. So it has massive backlash problems. But I want to start doing some more accurate work, and so one of the things I need to do is put ball screws in it. So anyway, I ordered some ball screws that are small enough to fit in there. Once they arrive, that'll be one of my projects, is getting it upgraded so that I can start getting some more accurate movement out of that tag.
I'll be interested to hear how that goes.
Yeah, and hopefully it's only a Band-Aid solution. I need to really upgrade past the tag into a significantly better mill. But at this point, the next step up is probably jumping past something like the Tormox and into, a used Haas mill or something like that. A little.
I was going to say, is there a Haas in your future?
Yeah, it's not far off. At this point, it's really a space and money problem. Once I've sold enough watches to be able to pay for a Haas mini mill, it's basically on order. So it's that's really high on my list. So it's just a question of, can I get the first, let's say 20 watches out the door without needing it? And I probably can. I don't see why not. It'll take me longer to do them. So yeah, that's high on my list. Same thing with a decent CNC mill, or decent CNC lathe, I should say. Because if I can get a decent CNC, like a Haas, lathe with, let's say, live tooling on it or a sub spindle on it, then that significantly speeds up the amount of time it takes me to make some of these parts, like some of these case parts and stuff. So, yeah, we'll see. But space and money, those are my two biggest limiting factors right now.
So once you've produced your first piece, will you be double watching, or give the Apple Watch some shelf time for a little bit?
I don't know. I know I'm going to need to wear that watch on a regular basis just to just to put it through its paces. But it's the Apple Watch is tough to give up as sort of a daily wear watch, especially during the day. I suspect while I'm here at home and sort of walking around the shop and stuff like that, I'll probably keep one on each wrist. I think when it comes to leaving the house for at least the first little while, I'll be wearing the mechanical one and seeing if I can go back to living in a completely mechanical world when it comes to watches.
So I'm interested I'm intrigued by this. Unpack that for me. What's what are the mental gymnastics that you're having to go through to go about creating a timepiece when you don't feel so inclined to be wearing it?
Well, this is the funny thing, right? Is that I love mechanical watches, and I love the look of them. I love the feel of them. I love the life in them. I love everything about mechanical watches. But the Apple Watch at this point is so convenient for me, and part of it has to do with my current lifestyle in terms of expecting notifications from people and tracking health and things like that. I think that as I move away from some of the things that I do now, some of the projects that I work on now and whatnot, that I will probably care less and less about the notifications. And particularly as I sort of start deep diving into manufacturing stuff, I suspect that fewer and fewer of those notifications are going to be important to me. So it's funny because as the watch gets better, I am probably going to walk away from it. And that's why I'm kind of hoping, the last episode when we were talking about sort of the future of AR kit and whatnot and other wearables, particularly glasses, I hope that comes sooner rather than later, because I would love to give up my watch and gain the benefits of the watch, like the, good notifications and things like that, and transfer them over to something like a pair of glasses where I can start getting even more information. I can start getting a heads-up display and things like that. But I don't know. The watch has been convenient in a lot of ways. Just I look at my phone less than I used to, because I know that if my watch buzzes and then it's something that I need to actually look at and decide whether I need to resolve it. But if my phone buzzes and my watch doesn't, I know that I can totally ignore the notification. It's not going to be something critical. So.
And would you then relegate some of the fitness tracking, quantified self side of things to something like a fitness tracking ring? Like they're starting to hit the market now?
Yeah, that might be a possibility. I would probably still use the Apple Watch, to be honest. I would be concerned less about sort of tracking over a whole day than I would be about just using it for tracking specific workouts and tracking sleep and things like that. One of the things that I love the Apple Watch for is actually tracking sleep and having it wake me up. Using the vibrating function of the alarm to wake me up in the morning is far more pleasant than waking up with some sort of loud sound. And I don't think I could go back to actually using an alarm clock that makes noise again. It's just every once in a while I need to fall back on it. Let's say I'm out on I'm out traveling or something like that, and I've needed to charge my watch overnight, and I'm not wearing it, and I go back to using my phone and it making noise to wake me up in the morning, and it just drives me crazy. So I think the watch would probably be relegated to an alarm clock and exercise tracking. So yeah, we'll see.
Any thoughts on ever adding an alarm based mechanical watch to your whole lineup?
I don't know. That's I love the idea of adding a either a minute repeater or a decimal repeater to my collection. That would be nice to be able to do, but I'm not sure about an alarm one. I don't know. Wearing a mechanical watch at night doesn't excite me as much. I used to, I have done it once or twice, but I'm not a fan of wearing mechanical watches at night. But wearing the Apple Watch at night has the advantage of being able to track sleep as well as being able to wake me up in the morning. So there are certain advantages to that.
You don't have the ticking time bomb under your pillow.
That's right. Yeah. I don't know. We'll see. I'm a bunch of contradictions wrapped up in an enigma, right? I don't know. I love the technology, but I love the old school stuff. It's the same thing when it comes to the something like the iPad and the Apple Pencil versus a fountain pen and a pad of paper, right? I love both, and both have a place in my life. So it's just a question of and that all shifts, right? As the iPad came out, I started using that obviously a lot as for reading and for consuming content. But then as the pencil came out, the ability to create stuff definitely improved. And so I've switched to using that a lot now for making notes and stuff. And my pen and paper use has changed in the way that I do that. So yeah, it's it's always changing depending on what the technology is out there. That whatever works best, and I'm happy to use whatever works best in my life. So I don't know. We will see.
So what is the last or most recent full-fledged thing you've created with your Apple Pencil on your iPad?
I meant to talk about this last episode, and I completely forgot about it. I've gone back to using an app that I played with very briefly a couple of years ago called Concepts. I think it's Concepts 5.0 is the one that's out now. It is a really nice drawing app that has a couple of key features that I love. It has all the usual freeform drawing that you're used to from all the different sketching apps that are out there, but it also has a grid system that you can snap to, as well as templates that you can snap to those grids. So you can, it has angled templates, it has line templates, it has an oval, rectangle, that kind of thing. So you can very quickly and precisely create a template for you to draw with, and be able to accurately draw shapes that you want onto your sketch. And then after you've finished drawing out those very accurate sections of your sketch, you can then easily add more freeform work onto it or behind it or whatever. So it's a really nice combination of a couple of different things, that rigidness that I really love when it comes to designing stuff, as well as the freeform part of it, which is handy when you're sort of trying to figure out what goes in between the rigid stuff. And so lately I have been working on a picture frame. So this is sort of a Fabergé style picture frame with a silver sheet as the background with guilloche and enamel on it, and then an oval picture frame in the center, and then a sort of silver frame around that oval, as well as around the outside of it, to sort of keep it all together. This is a pretty standard thing that Fabergé made 100 odd years ago, and they were pretty common as part of their collection. Tiffany's and other people have done similar things. So I've had a few ideas for doing this. It's a great way of showing off some enamel work, and I'm trying to sort of exercise a few design ideas that I've had for years that I've been unable to sort of get around to finishing. So yeah, so that's what I've been doing on the iPad lately, and it's nice because I can start working on it as a sketch like this, and before I go into something like Fusion 360, where that is all about precision and all about, manufacturing or designing or building a model that's extremely accurate. With the sketching, I can do the freeform sketching that I need before I get in there. But then it also, it has the ability to export, obviously, all that stuff, and I can bring those drawings into something like Fusion later and be able to use them as references for the for what I'm doing later. So yeah, it's a nice combination of features. And one of the issues I've had is getting the correct proportions for this picture frame, and it's something that I'm happy with. So with this, I've been able to play around with different, let's say a 4x6 or a 4x5 or whatever, 5x7. I can sort of experiment with a lot of the common picture sizes, see how the oval that I have fits within the rectangular frame, and see how those proportions work and see what I like. And that's it's nice to be able to do that.
So is it something that's purely an avenue of experimentation for you, or is it something you intend to sell at some point in the future?
This first one, I already have a particular goal in mind. So this is something that I'm making, and there is an end customer in mind for this particular one. I will probably make a few different things like this that are sort of similar. I've got a few ideas for converting some mechanical clock movements into desk clocks. One of the things I've collected a couple of over the years are the Waltham 8-day clock movements that were very common in the early 20th century in planes and automobiles. They were used as the dash clock on a car, for instance. And they're these beautiful little 8-day movements that are more watches than clocks, really. And a lot of them have been orphaned from their cases since the cases had gold in them. People have melted down the gold over the years. So
orphaned from their cars
and orphaned from their cars.
fuselages.
Yeah, yeah. Anybody that happens to have a Waltham 8-day clock movement with the car attached to it, and you're looking to get rid of it, send me a note. I will take both off your hands. Or the plane, for that matter. A lot of these movements have been orphaned, and they're reasonably inexpensive. They often need to be cleaned up a bit, and I'll probably do some work on them. Like a lot of them, they're not jeweled, so I'll probably go in and retrofit them with jewels and a few other features that make them a bit more user friendly when it comes to using them as a desk clock versus as a dash clock. Yeah, one of the problems with these clock movements from their original purpose is that they have a long stem for winding them that comes down off the bottom of the movement, and that's not exactly convenient if you're trying to convert it into a desk clock, like in the form of sort of a picture frame. So one of the things I'll do is I'll convert them so they can be key wound from the face of the clock. That just requires a fairly simple modification. And
Rewind.
Yeah.
Why not just turn it on its head and make the entire dome on the top of a desk clock the crown? You could just have this giant dome and just turn it and wind your desk clock. Much simpler modification. All you have to do is change the orientation of the dial, and you'll be making the dial from scratch anyway.
Yep.
Many desktop clocks have a top to them of sorts, so it doesn't even have to be a dome. It can just be an oversized crown.
Yeah,
Engine turned nice and narrow.
That's a possibility as well, and I might play around with that. I don't know. I don't like the design aspects of that. Like, I don't like the aesthetics of it. I think it's a bit cleaner having a key wound in the face of it. I don't know. We'll see. I still haven't decided what I'm going to do with that. It's a very easy modification to. You just need to change one of the arbors that goes through the barrel. There's two barrels on it, so you can just sort of extend it out and put a square profile on it. So it's relatively easy to do. I've already got one that sort of as a prototype in it, and it seems to work pretty well.
All right.
We'll have to see what works best, and I've got a couple of ideas, and we'll have to see what I like and what I don't like. I've thought about also hiding the crown sort of in behind the frame, and either putting just sort of a long shaft out the side of the frame or the top or whatever, so you can use a key from the top to wind it like that, But I like the idea of either hiding the crown or making it so that it's wound from the face. So yeah, I'm open to some ideas.
Personally, not much of a fan of having a keyhole through the face of a clock. That's why I tend to prefer weight-driven clocks when it comes to clocks, or with pocket watches, the variants that are key wound,
Sure.
having it set and wound from the back of the watch.
Yeah.
I just not a huge fan of the break in the dial. Try and keep things simple.
Yeah, that's the other possibility, is actually winding it from the back of the clock as well. So there's a few options available to me. So I have to decide which way I'm going to go with it, and what's happiest. I certainly haven't sort of committed to any one strategy yet, and I've got 3 or 4 of these movements. So I've got a few that I can experiment with and sort of see what works best. Between a couple of picture frames and a couple of those desk clocks, I'm sure that I'll have a few of those available for sale at some point or another. They'll be interesting. But as I said, it sort of gives me an interesting avenue to exercise some design ideas that I've had. And I've been looking at Fabergé work for so many years now that I want to try and do sort of a modern version of some of what they did. I think some of the execution on their early pieces was not particularly good. A lot of the stuff was just being mass produced, so the engine turning and the enamel work is not exactly exceptional. Not all of this was being sold to the Tsar, and being able to sort of experiment from a quality point of view and try and improve some of that would be nice. And then also the aesthetics from 100 years ago are different than they are today. So I want to try seeing how I can meld the engine turning and the enamel work into a more modern aesthetic and see what I can do with it, and see what I'm happy with. It's a slightly larger canvas than a pen or a watch is, obviously, so I can experiment a little bit.
Yeah, but Tech Philippe certainly goes to town each year on their desk clocks in terms of churning out the rarer handcrafts.
Absolutely, and that's the nice part about it, right? Is that you've got such a large canvas there. You can do some cool stuff. It's always something that sort of gets pushed to the back burner whenever there's other stuff that comes up, like the watches or pens or whatever. They usually end up being sort of pushed to the forefront. But this particular desk clock, I've got a particular client in mind for it, so we'll see what comes out of it, and hopefully it's something that I can get done in the next few months.
Well, from the sounds of things, you've got an expansive stovetop.
Stovetops. I don't think I could handle a single stovetop at this point. I don't think the largest stovetop would be large enough for me.
Thanks for listening to Off Hours. You can find detailed show notes at offhours.show. If you'd like to keep up to date with the show, follow us on Twitter @offhours. John can be found on Twitter @UnderTheLoop, and Chris can be found on Twitter and Instagram @silver_hand.
This week should be interesting. I made an order into Cousins. Got a few specific toys for my watch build. So I got my taps and dies for doing some 1mm screws. So I'm going to be making my first watch screws this weekend, I think.
Nice.
Should be interesting. I have never made screws this small. They are
That's tiny.
probably not quite an order of magnitude smaller than my smallest screw, but they're certainly an order of magnitude smaller than the screws that I typically make. So it's or the threads I typically make. So it's going to be interesting.
I usually use the threading accessories on your lathe.
Well, I am used to doing that. Almost all of the threading that I do is all using the lead screws on the lathe. So even though I do have taps and dies that I use occasionally, when you're threading external threads at a larger scale, taps tend not to work very well. They tend to be they require a lot of force to be able to cut, and it's difficult to keep them axially aligned while you're initiating that cut, so you can have alignment issues with when you're using a die. Whereas when you're cutting using the lead screw and the carriage, it's very easy to keep your threads aligned properly and axially correct to your part. Yeah, this will be interesting because this die is absolutely tiny. It's kind of ridiculous how small it is.
Yeah.
And I'm terrified of these taps. I ordered 3 of them, but I'm sure that I'm going to end up snapping some of these.
Slow and steady. He's on, he's off, he's on, he's off. Lots of lubricant.
If you were drilling out a hole for a 1 millimeter tapped hole, what size would you drill that? You have any guesses?
I don't have a fixed ratio. I've always just eyeballed it. I do like just slightly wider than like if you stripped away all the threads, then
right,
just
the
down
root of the
post.
Yeah, the root of the tap.
The root of the tap. And I go like just like a hair is excessive.
Yeah, a hair would
to
be
use
excessive.
a turn of phrase.
Yes.
A hair larger, but
Okay.
A fraction of a hair larger than that.
I picked up some drill bits in various sizes. I've got some 0.95, some 0.9, some 0.85, and some 0.8 millimeter drills. So I'm going to experiment a little bit to see what works best. And because those threads, there's not a lot of thread there. I would be surprised if I even got down to the 0.85. I suspect it's going to be a 0.9 or a 0.95 millimeter drill for that.